July 31st, and then we're going to also have church August 3rd, I believe, at the campground at just 11 o'clock, no Sunday school. And then also men's breakfast August 2nd will be at the campground too. So don't forget that. Don't show up here because nobody will be here. So if you go to men's breakfast, usually it's going to be switched to the campground. Let's open in a word of prayer. Dear God, thank you for this beautiful day that you've given us and for everybody that's here today. And just help us now to learn something from the lesson we're about to hear that we can apply to our lives and better live our lives for you. Amen. She's doing really good. She's hopefully going to be released tomorrow. So tomorrow morning they're thinking, if everything keeps on track.
All right, good evening. Who can cheer the heart like Jesus by His presence all divine? True and tender, pure and precious. So I don't know this next one real well, so hopefully you all do. I listened to it a whole bunch of times on YouTube, but we'll see. Try it again. Lord, you are more precious than silver. Lord, you are more costly than gold. Lord, you are more beautiful than diamonds. Nothing I desire compares to you. Thank you, Pastor Jeff.
All right, good evening. That was a new one for me. Wasn't familiar with that one, so thank you. That was a very nice song. All right, it is our missionary story night. So what missionary have we been reading about? Noah. David Livingstone, very good. What continent is he working on? Silas? No. No candy tonight. It's missionary story night. Sam? What? Oh, Africa. Yes. Yes, he's working on the continent of Africa. Now, who joined David Livingstone on his last discovery trip? Who went with him last time? That was different. Elijah. His family went with him. This was the one he said, you know what, that's it, I'm done, I'm taking my family with me. The wife and the kids went with him. All right. This is a tough one. I don't know that I would have had it if I hadn't seen it in the book. Does anybody remember the name of the river he discovered last time? It's been a month. It's a tough one. Yeah, everybody else is drawing blank. I was too. The Zambezi River. The Zambezi River. He found the Zambezi River. Now, the locals mention this waterfall, this amazing waterfall on the river that they want to take David to. Does he go and see the river, the waterfall? Noah. Nope, he doesn't. He does not go and see the river. Specifically, he says his wife was about to have a baby and his adventure partner, Cotton Oswell, was needed back in England. So they pack up and they head back. So let's see what happens now. It was September. Oh, yes, hang on. I'm sorry. Last time somebody had asked, he won an award from the Geological Society of X number of pounds, and somebody asked how much money that was, and Marcia has figured it out. So, Marcia, what was it?
Okay, 25 British pounds of 1850 today would be 17,203 British pounds, which in U.S. money would be $13,760.
All right. So, $13,000 he won. He was awarded for his work mapping areas. And the interesting thing, if you remember, to think about what it's costing him to do this, he said he basically immediately spent that to fund the next trip and couldn't even completely fund it on his own, even with that. So, Just some interesting, useful information on that so we understand the kind of money we're talking about here. All right, now, so it was September 15th, 1851, and a hot and sunny day, like all the days so far, on the journey home to Kolobeng, which is where they're basing out of now, okay? The wagons were stopped beside the Zauga River as the remaining scrawny oxen that had not died from the bite of the tsetse fly drank loudly from the river. Another sound suddenly filled the air, the crying of a newborn baby. The baby was David and Mary Livingstone's fifth child, another son. David climbed from the wagon, carrying the tiny infant in his arms. He first looked over at the river, whose water had saved his life on an earlier trip, and then looked down at the baby. I will call you Zauga, he whispered. Oh, I will call you Zauga, he whispered gently to the infant. Zauga Livingstone. And Zauga it was, although the boy was officially named William Oswell Livingstone. The nickname Zauga stuck with him for the rest of his life. Mary recovered quickly from the birth, but within a few days, Thomas came down with malaria. David fought to save his son's life, dousing him with quinine and keeping his body wrapped tightly in a damp sheet to quell the fever. He also drove the wagons up to some distant hills where it was a little bit cooler. Thomas lay sick for a month before finally showing signs of recovery. When he was up and about again, the party continued on the journey south. The whole episode with the birth of Zauga and Thomas's near fatal illness frightened David. For the first time, he wondered whether Mary's mother had been right. Was it selfish and stubborn of him to take his family along on the expeditions? The entire matter weighed heavy on his mind, and he spent long hours on the trip back discussing with Cotton Oswell what he should do. By the time he reached Kolobeng, he had made up his mind. Mary and the children should go back to Scotland, where they would be safe. David's family would help look after the children, who could all go to a proper school. As soon as he was sure of his decision, David wrote to the London Missionary Society asking them to help Mary with expenses when she returned home. Despite her parents being Scottish, Scotland wasn't home to Mary Livingstone. She had been born and raised in southern Africa. The one time her parents had taken her home on furlough, Mary had found Scotland to be a strange and terrifying place. She begged David to allow her to stay with him. She would much rather risk a lion attack in Africa than attend a ladies' tea party in Edinburgh. But David was firm. He had made up his mind. He planned to go further inland on his next expedition, and he would not risk taking his wife and children with him. So, what happened at the Zauga River on the way back to Kolobeng? Mr. Kevin. Well, yes, that too. That too. One son got malaria, and another son was born. So, I was thinking the birth, but, although my answer, I have it written down right here, both of them are there, so you got it. All right. So, because of that, remember, David left the Zambezi River intending to get back to Kolobeng before the new baby was born. So he got halfway back, and then the baby was born. Then Thomas got malaria. So, with all of that going on, what does David decide to do with his family? Sam? Send them back to Scotland. Okay? All right. What does his wife want to do? Stay with him. She wants to stay in Africa. He wants to send her back. Now, we've talked about it the last time he wrestled with this decision, and it's a tough call because there is something to protecting his family, But there is also something to, if God wants his family with him, God will protect them. So, David's got a tough choice to make. He's made his decision. So, let's see what happens. All right. It was a dejected family that made its way south from Colobang to Port Elizabeth. David assured Mary he would join her in Scotland in 2 years and that his family in Scotland would love the children. Mary, though, wasn't so sure. When the group reached Port Elizabeth, Cotton Oswell once again proved himself to be a generous friend. He gave Mary Livingstone a purse containing 170 pounds. Consider that, considering what we just learned about what the 20-some, close to $100,000, okay? Cotton Oswell was an awfully nice guy. Okay, a purse containing 170 pounds. It was well over a year's salary for the family. Mary was very grateful. I think so. Cotton Oswell also insisted on outfitting the entire family with new clothes. As David looked around at what they were wearing, he was thankful for the generous gesture. The whole family was wearing the same clothes they'd taken with them on the expedition north, though the clothes were now patched and stained. David watched as his family stood on the deck of the Trafalgar ship on April 23rd, 1852. He could see 6.5-year-old Robert grinning from ear to ear as he peered over the railing. David smiled. He could see that even at such a young age, Robert had his sense of adventure and drive to travel and explore. 5-year-old Agnes stood holding tightly to Thomas's hand while Mary stood grim-faced, holding baby Zalga in her arms. David waved as the mooring lines holding the ship to the dock were let go. The Trafalgar drifted out into the bay and hoisted its sails. When the ship was just a speck on the horizon, David finally turned and walked back to the boarding house where he was staying. David remained in Port Elizabeth for 3 months before again setting out for Colobang. He was glad to be on his way north, not only because looking at the ships coming and going from England made him miss his wife and children all the more, but also because the Boers were in town. The Boers in town were very unfriendly to him. The Boers did not like any of the missionaries from the London Missionary Society because the missionaries often took sides with the Africans in disputes. David was doubly despised because he was also trying to open up northern areas for the British. David did not know, however, just how much the Boers hated him until he reached Kuruman, where he was delayed for 2 weeks while a broken wagon wheel was mended. On the day before David was due to head back to his home in Colobang, Masbili, Chief Shilele's wife, came running into the courtyard of the main mission house at Kuruman. "Is Mr. David here?" she yelled between deep gasps for air. David was inside the house writing in his journal. He looked up and frowned when he heard the voice, which he immediately recognized. Well, what was Masbili doing all these miles from her home? Something must be wrong. He flung his journal onto the bed and ran outside. Masbili, I'm here. What is it? So we have to ask you questions now. Does David's family actually leave? Yes. He sends them to Scotland. All right. Who pays for the trip? Cotton Oswell. Now remember, Cotton Oswell was not a missionary. He was a British adventurer who liked big game hunting and exploring and had deep pockets. He liked David Livingstone, and so he went with him and funded a lot of his expeditions. All right. Now, who shows so much hatred towards David? Elijah? The Boers. And about everybody else. But anyhow, the Boers. Now, does anybody, I had to go back and make sure I was right. Does anybody remember who are these Boers? Who were they? Miss Katrina? They were Dutch settlers who had landed, moved in, and their method was Just get a whole bunch of Africans, make them slaves, and make them farm for you. And as the British came in, they moved further out from the British because the British weren't participating in that. And the Boers were also gathering up Africans, the ones they weren't using, and sending them off in slave ships. So the Boers were not really nice people. Okay? So, let's see. Where does David stop on his way back to Kolobeng? Kuruman, but why? Why does he have to stop there? Busted wheel. All right. So he's on his way back, but he has a busted wheel. He's got to stop, and it takes time to rebuild it. Nick, question. I think I had that in my head. That should be right. That should be right. It was because there was Kuruman, Mabotsa, and Mabotsa was being pressured by the Boers, so they moved to, to Kolobeng. Yeah, I think. Don't absolutely quote me on that. All right. All right. Let's see. Who comes looking for David? Silas? Nope, not here. Sam? The chief's wife. He doesn't want to say the name. I don't blame him. All right. Chief Shilele's wife comes looking for David. Why would a chief's wife be this far from home looking for David Livingston? Let's find out. All right. Well, let's see. All right. I am here, he said. What is it? Musbili swung around to face David, who could see the terror in her eyes. She pulled a letter from a leather pouch that was draped around her waist and handed it to David. Here, my husband wrote this, but he could not come to you. They are still hunting for him. It was terrible, so terrible. In an instant, David knew what had happened. It was the Boers, wasn't it? He questioned. The Boers invaded the village, didn't they? Musbili nodded and let out a loud sob. 2 of my sons were carried away. About 60 of the people were shot and killed. The cattle and the oxen are all gone. They burned all of our crops in the fields. Mr. David, what are we to do? David didn't answer her. He tore open the letter and began to read. In the letter, Chief Shilele filled in all the details. On September 27th, 600 Boers on horseback, plus several hundred more natives, had surrounded the village. They had wagons with cannons mounted on them and thousands of rounds of ammunition. The outcome was assured before the first shot was fired. The Boers had taken hundreds of slaves, just as Musbili had said, and had killed 60 people. Chief Shilele and Mabalwe, David's African agent, had escaped, but they had nothing to go back to. No home, no crops, no neighbors. And there was more bad news. The Boers had taken special delight in ransacking David's belongings, taking what they wanted and burning the rest. Burning the rest. David stood staring at the letter, trying to take it all in. His books, his medicines, surgical instruments, they were all gone, except for what he had taken with him, including his navigational equipment, a few books and some clothing. He had nothing left. Although it took David days to recover from the shock of what had happened to his friends and to his own home, he did come to see some good in it. Perhaps now every native in Africa would know he was not secretly on the side of the Boers. He also realized how close he had come to being caught up in the raid himself. If his wagon wheel had not broken on that trip, he would have been back in Kolobeng when the shooting started. It was unlikely the Boers would have let him live to tell about it. And what if his wife and children had been there? David couldn't bring himself to think about that. David truly understood for the first time just how much the Boers hated him, and he decided not to make himself an easy target for them again. As well, his missionary goals were were to open up the interior to the north and preach the gospel message wherever he went. He began to see that these goals could be accomplished without the need for a home base. From then on, David decided his home would be wherever he laid his head for the night. He would not maintain a mission station again. So what happened to Kolobeng? Elijah took slaves and killed people. Does anybody remember the description they gave of how the Boers would invade a village? They gave a description of that earlier. They would actually stand behind native slaves and force the native slaves to go in front of the Dutch settlers and use them as human shields. So if anybody from the village started firing, they just hit natives. Terrible, terrible situation, all right? What else did they steal and destroy specific? What'd you say, Renee? David's house with all of his medical supplies. His medical stuff, all of that has been destroyed. Now, what then does David decide to do about a home base? Zach? Yep. Wherever he put his head down, that was his home base for today. He decides, and again, this is another one where he does not have his family with him, so there is some freedom in that. And his family was not present when this attack happened, but he wasn't present either. So had his family been with him, they wouldn't have been in this attack. But I understand his thinking of, if I had left my wife and kids in Kolobeng while I took Cotton Oswell to the Cape, then I would have been caught in this too. Or they would have been caught in this. So, tough spot, and he decides he's just going to live the nomad life and keep moving. It is harder to hit a moving target, so he's just going to keep moving. All right? So, let's see. All right. Giving up ideas of a permanent mission station freed David tremendously. David could go where he wanted, stay as long as he chose. The first place he headed for was Linyante in Makololo territory, where Chief Shilele had apparently escaped. On the way to Linyante, David met Chief Shilele, headed south on his way to personally protest to the English chief, Queen Victoria herself, what had happened to his people. In the following months, the chief made the 1,000-mile trek to Cape Town. However, the chief did not have enough money for passage on a ship to England and eventually had to give up his quest and walk the 1,000 miles back. In the meantime, David kept heading north and finally reached Linyante, the main village of the Makololo people. The people were glad to see him, especially since the great chief Mizilakazi was at, so the great chief Mizilakazi was at war with them, and the Arab slave traders were making more and more raids into their lands. The world was changing quickly for the Makololo, who hoped that David Livingstone would help them stay safe and make sense of all the changes. David was introduced to Sikilutu, the new chief. Although Sikilutu was only 18 years old, his mother had handed control over of the Makololo tribe to him because she didn't want to care. She didn't want the job herself. Okay. Found that interesting. All right. David had been at Linyante only a week when he came down with malaria. This was the first time he had contracted the disease. Although no one at that time understood that mosquitoes spread the disease, David did notice that there appeared to be some connection between them and malaria. He wrote in his journal that the mosquitoes were showing, as they always do, the presence of malaria. The malaria convinced David he needed to press on in his travels and find a better area that he could recommend to white people to settle. With the Boers to the east, the Portuguese and the ferocious Zulus to the north, the Kalahari Desert to the south, David decided to head in a northwesterly direction towards the coast. On November 11th, 1852, David set out from Linyante accompanied by 27 Makalolo guides and helpers and several oxen. Onto the backs of the oxen were loaded some elephant tusks and a few strings of beads for trading along the way, as well as David's navigational equipment, books and clothes, and the medicines the Reverend Moffat had given David, a lantern, rifles, ammunition, and a small tent. With these few belongings, David Livingstone was about to attempt a feat successfully completed only twice before in known history. He was about to cross West Africa, using canoes to navigate the rivers where possible and completing the rest of the journey on foot. He had little of value to trade with the unknown tribes he would encounter along the way, and even less in food. To supplement their food supply, the travelers would eat seeds, meal, and manioc roots that they could find along the way. And since David was the only one who could shoot straight, it fell to him to shoot the wild game they would eat. So, what tribe does David reunite with in Linyante? Let me catch the name. Something like that. Makalolo. Makalolo is the name. That's my pronunciation of it. See, none of you are African, so I can pronounce these any way I want and get away with it. All right? So we're going with Makalolo. All right? So he meets up with the Makalolo. But what does David get while he's there for the first time? Malaria, says Renee up here quietly, because I don't know. It's more fun to whisper it than to, yeah, anyhow. David gets malaria this time, all right? And his answer, I have malaria, I must need to keep traveling. Okay, sure, good plan, dude. I don't know, it's his thinking. So he decides to head, and he is thinking, I need to find a better place for British to come and live, because obviously this area has malaria, and that's not a good idea. They hadn't made all of the connections yet, although apparently David Livingstone was starting to see that the mosquitoes had something to do with the malaria. There was a lot of mosquitoes, people had malaria. What are we thinking here? So they're starting to see a connection, but now David has malaria, so he's going to keep traveling west. He's going to try and get to the west coast of Africa. Yeah, that's west if you're looking at the map. Okay, yeah, I had to think about that. He's going to try and head northwest, across the other part of Africa. All right, so let me start. Okay, yep, I'm going. Got to find my place. All right, so David's going to shoot any wild game that they would eat because he's the only one who can shoot straight. All right? David had not counted on it raining as much as it did. The ground soon became sodden and difficult to walk over. Everything made of metal, including his guns, rusted, and the leather on his boots mildewed overnight. Even his tent rotted and ripped. But these difficulties paled when compared to David's difficulties with the tribes whose territory the expedition passed through. The tribes nearest the Makalolos were friendly enough, but as the men moved further westward, they met new tribes outside the Makalolos' sphere of influence who were not so friendly. David and his men experienced several near heart-stopping moments when they were surrounded and escorted into villages to meet the chief. On these occasions, David had to talk fast to avoid physical harm, but eventually he and his men were always allowed to go on their way. That is, until David came to cross the Kwango River and ended up being taken to see the chief of the Bashinji, the Bashinji tribe. I practiced that one several times in my office, and I still stumbled on it. Bashinji, okay, chief of the Bashinji tribe. No, you cannot cross the river, the chief told David. Not until you give me something I want. What would that be? Inquired David wearily. A man, or an ox, or a gun would do fine, replied the chief, smiling to reveal his missing front teeth. That's outrageous. Well, we have some beads, said David. Beads? You would insult me with beads? Said the chief. I do not think you are in any position to be telling me what I want. In fact, maybe I need a man and an ox and a gun. Ha! You don't understand that man of power here, that I am a man of power here. David tried not to change his expression on his face. He understood things all too well. The chief of the Bashinji could take everything from them, or even kill them if he wanted. And if they did, no one would ever know. David began to pray silently. He could not afford to lose a rifle, even a rusty one. The oxen were useful, and he would certainly never hand over a hired man to become a slave. I need to talk with my men, replied David, desperately stalling for time. Very well, said the chief. We will speak again in the morning. I do not think you'll be going anywhere. You cannot cross the river without our help, and if you turn back, we will follow you. He let out a loud laugh. David was far from laughing when he returned to his men to tell them the grim news. The men were all sitting around a small fire discussing what they should do when they heard a rustle in the bushes behind them. David grabbed his gun as everyone's eyes turned towards the noise. Suddenly, a man dressed in a uniform of a Portuguese soldier stepped into the clearing. My name is Sergeant Cipriano de Abreu. At your service, he said, bowing to David. Is there anything I can help you with? For a moment, David was too amazed to speak, but he quickly regained his composure and told the sergeant about their predicament. Sergeant de Abreu told them there was a Portuguese settlement across the river, and he would ferry them there if they liked. In the middle of the night, the party left the riverbank. The Bashinji chief heard the commotion and directed his warriors to fire on them. Thankfully, the warriors were poor shots, and no one was hit. All right, so let's see. What happened more than David was expecting? Rain. I'm beginning to think David is not much of an African weatherman. It does find interesting to me, for all of the exploring and all of the things he's learned about Africa, he doesn't seem to understand the weather patterns of Africa. He keeps getting caught in rain problems, weather problems. Anyhow, so what does the chief of the Bashinji want in order to help David cross the river? What is he asking for? Sophia, a man, an ox, or a gun? Or if you make me mad, all three. Okay? This guy is a stiff negotiator. All right? Or he can just kill you all and take everything. So there's that. All right? But who then helps David cross the river? Huh? Russell. Russell, the Portuguese soldier, helps them get everything across. All right, we got time to keep going. All right. Much to David's surprise, the Portuguese were very kind to him and his men. Sergeant de Abreu served them the best meal David had eaten since leaving Kuraman 4.5 months before. He also gave David and his men enough rations to make it to the Portuguese trading post of Kasanji, where he told David to ask for Captain Neves. Captain Neves turned out to be as kind as the helpful Sergeant de Abreu. He gave David a set of his own clothes to replace the rags he was wearing and insisted on feeding the entire group. When the group was rested and ready to travel on, Captain Neves sent a corporal with them. The corporal had an official letter giving him permission to requisition whatever food and supplies he needed for David's expedition. The corporal guided the group all the way to the coast. As they got closer, however, the Makololo guides began to get nervous and whispered among themselves. They were going to see the ocean. But big ships traveled the ocean. Big ships filled with slaves. Eventually, they became so anxious that they confided in David. Although he was unsure of exactly what would happen when they got to the coast, David promised the men he would defend them with his own life. He would never let them be taken prisoner while he was alive and able to prevent it. On May 31st, 1854, the expedition wound its way wearily into the port town of Luanda. By this time, David was so sick from a relapse of his malaria that he was forced to travel on the back of an ox. And even then, the group had to stop every few minutes to let him rest. Still, David was strong enough to look up and see the Atlantic Ocean. He had done it. He had made the 2,000-mile journey from Kuraman through the Kalahari Desert and the West African jungle all the way to the west coast. Before long, David found himself in front of a British consulate, an imposing brick building with a brightly colored flower garden in front of it. He swung open the gate, not knowing for sure what awaited him. He need not have worried. Mr. Gabriel, the consul, was amazed but glad to meet him. On seeing how sick David was, he ordered him straight to bed. The story of his adventure could wait until he was rested. A week later, a British warship berthed in Luanda. One of the ship's doctors called on David and was appalled by the missionary's physical condition. David was little more than a skeleton. The doctor ordered him to stay in bed for at least a month to regain his full strength and recover from the malaria and dysentery. As he lay in bed, David corrected his journals and wrote reports home to the Royal Geographic Society and the London Missionary Society. At one stage, the British captain visited him and offered him free passage back to England on his ship, the Forerunner. Although David refused the offer, he was relieved when the captain agreed to transport his letters, reports, and maps back to England. He knew that the London Missionary Society and the Royal Geographic Society would be glad to hear of his findings, and that his wife would be glad to learn he was still alive. If David had been on his own, he would have eagerly accepted the offer to return to England and deliver the reports in person. But he wasn't alone. He had brought 27 Makololo men with him to Luanda and had promised to return them safely home. So while a voyage to England may have been appealing, David knew what he had to do. He had made a promise, and he would keep it. Somehow, he would have to get well enough to guide the Makololo men home. Now, what makes the Makololo guides nervous about the coast? What are they worried about, Mr. Richard? Big ships that carry slaves away. All right. What is wrong? What is wrong with David when he gets to Luanda? Noah. Everything. Well, there's one reason. Yes, the malaria has come back along with dysentery, and he's just awful. Okay? What does the ship captain offer? Free passage back to England. That's actually pretty impressive. That's a pretty impressive offer. Okay? But does David take the offer? No, he doesn't. Why? He owes his men. He's like, these men came with me, and I promised them I would guide them back and get them home. So he's being true to that, although he has no idea how he's going to do that health-wise at this point. He's got to recover enough to get healthy enough to go. Now, as we look at this and we see David Livingstone and what he has gone through, what he's done, I do come back to, I think David Livingstone, well, he says he loved the exploring, but he does have a heart, it says, to preach the gospel to these people and open up routes for other British missionaries to come and go these places when it's known how to get there and known where these places are. So David he is convinced he has something God wants him to do. And as we looked at our other missionary, Paul, in Acts chapter 20, in verse 24, that was right. Acts 20 and 24, we have Paul discussing how he feels about getting his mission done. Paul said this way, "But I do not account my life of any value, nor as precious to myself, if only I may finish my course and the ministry that I received from the Lord Jesus to testify to the gospel of the grace of God. Paul set an example. David Livingstone, whether you agree with some of his choices or not, is continuing with this same philosophy. What happens to me and my body is not important. What is important is whether or not I do what God has called me to do. David what we know now about malaria is a really awful disease. And my understanding is that he's having a relapse here. My understanding is it never entirely goes away. It keeps coming back. It just keeps coming back around. And, well, they didn't even have anti-malarial meds then. Now, missionaries have to, depending on the area you're in, they have to wrestle with the debate of the long-term side effects of anti-malarial medication or the long-term effects of contracting malaria. Neither one are good. So missionaries, again, have to wrestle with that. Yes, there was malaria and dengue. Evening mosquitoes carried malaria. Evening mosquitoes carried malaria. Morning mosquitoes carried dengue. I don't understand the differences in mosquitoes, but that's what everybody said. We never got either one. We never took the anti-malaria meds. The areas we were in were not big for malaria, but there were outbreaks of dengue, fairly frequent, and dengue, depending on which strain you contracted, could be really painful or deadly. Take your pick. And it was never a good thing. We actually rushed Sam to the hospital in Manila once thinking he had dengue. Turned out he didn't. But we thought he did, and it was looking that way. So, yes, missionaries still fight with these things, and then we say, well, okay, so missionaries have to do that, but we need to make the distinction. This needs to be a philosophy for all Christians. Jesus told his disciples, take up your cross and follow me. And that's, to us, we've heard it. We've heard it. It doesn't seem shocking to us. But to his disciples, the cross was the most gruesome picture of execution for the worst of the worst criminals. And so for Jesus to say, pick up your electric chair and follow me. Pick up your lethal injection and follow me. Jesus was being very graphic and very descriptive of the life of a Christian. It's not expected to be easy. It's expected to be difficult. And if we have the perspective that David had, that Paul had, of Acts 20:24, he says, I do not account my life of any value or precious to myself, if only I may finish my course. He says, the only value to my physical body is to accomplish God's purpose and to keep serving God. That can be across the street. It can be up in Canada. It can be over in Japan. It can be in Sweden, in another place in Japan, in Italy. Thank you. Sorry, brain shut down on that. It doesn't matter where you are. You have to make the choice. What happens to me is unimportant as long as the gospel gets preached. Tough lessons, tough way of going about it, but we need to remember and learn from guys like David Livingstone. And again, we may not always agree with his choice, but he made a choice that he was convinced was best for his mission of the gospel and to do what needed to be done. So he made those choices, and he kept serving. All right? Any questions about tonight's lesson with David Livingston? Sam? Okay, the long-term effects of anti-malarial meds, I don't remember. I think they break down your liver. I think it's like liver kidney destruction eventually if you take them for too long. That's my rough guess from 20 years ago research. I did the research once, went, okay, I don't want to do that and throw it away. So cleared out that part of the brain. Save space for more. Okay. Malaria, it's like a horrible fever. I honestly couldn't give you too much of a description. I've read several different people. Nate Saint gets malaria and almost dies from it too, if I remember right. Do you have any more greater description on malaria?
Oh, it really is, it's very, word that I want. It just knocks you off.
Okay.
It takes a long time to recover from it, and there is no medicine to clear your system of it. So depending on some people that they have to learn to pace themselves. If they overwork, then boy, they get another go-round of malaria, and they have to start all over with quinine plus some other drugs. But yeah, it basically ruins the brain, the liver, and the kidney.
There you go. So it just kind of trashes your body and puts you into, diesel mechanics would call it limp mode. Okay? Elijah. Dengue is different. Dengue they refer to as break-bone fever, if I remember right. It is a fever that is an incredibly high fever and causes intense pain in your bones, and eventually can cause death. So, yeah, dengue is different, and I think it's an Asia-only thing. I'm not sure. Malaria is a little more widespread than dengue, from what I remember. All right, any other quick questions before we wrap up? Mr. Charlie. He has mentioned several times his skill with languages, and he's learned several languages and is using some translators, and some of the local tribesmen that he's working with will know some of the other languages. But yes, I've wondered that too. I'm like, he's switching a lot of tribes here. How many different, and I know there were a lot of languages, I don't know how many different languages. That's a good question. Mm-hmm. That was, yeah, the native guides that were with him would have known some of the languages too. So the ones he didn't, they would, is the idea.
Now, I'm showing my age, but there used to be a part of Africa that was on the west side that was called the Belgian.
Okay.
Oh, you remember.
Okay, well, we're all promoting age.
If that was the area in which he was going to, was the Belgian Congo. There was the British embassy there.
My African geography is non-existent, other than what I'm reading in the book. And I have not delved deeply into African geography for this. So I cannot tell you if he was headed for the British Congo or not. The Belgian Congo. Sorry, Belgian Congo. See, I can't even say it right. All right. Let's close up. And next Sunday evening will be our Lord's Table service, followed by our semi-annual business meeting. So please remember to come back for that. Friday is senior lunch, okay? So those who qualify for that or think they qualify for that, whether they do or not, feel free to come as long as you bring something to eat. All right? Okay, Gary, would you close us in prayer tonight?